This story is called Guide Dog Protects Blind Owner from Racist Cop. Suddenly, a gunshot rings out. Hey, before we get into today's video, I need your help. Subscribing is one of the best ways to support us. It's fast, free, and helps us continue to bring you amazing content. Your support means a lot. Thank you so much. Now let's get into the story. David Miller hadn't seen a sunset in 6 years. He lost his sight in the Army, an explosion during deployment that took his vision but left him with something even harder to carry: silence and loneliness. His parents were gone. His siblings barely called. And the only soul who never left his side. Libby. A golden retriever, gifted to him on his 18th birthday, when life was full of dreams. She had been with him through deployments, heartbreak, and hospital beds. Now she was his eyes. His family. His everything. Walking through a hostile world. One summer afternoon, David and Libby were walking their usual route. The world around him was a blur of sounds and smells. He heard laughter from kids in the park. Felt the breeze on his face. Libby walked faithfully by his side, guiding him, stopping at curbs, keeping him safe. Until a car slowed beside them. And everything changed. The racist cop. A police cruiser rolled up, window down. "What's this?" The voice was cold, mocking. David turned his head slightly. "Can I help you, officer?" The cop laughed. "Help me? I think you've helped yourself enough. Military injury, huh? Typical. You people think you're heroes, but you're just thugs in uniform." David's heart clenched. He heard the door open. Boots on pavement. "Bet you weren't much different before you lost your sight. Probably out there breaking the law like the rest of them." Libby stiffened. A low growl rumbled in her throat. The cop sneered. "Oh, what? The mutt's got an attitude too." Then, without warning, a hard kick to Libby's side. She yelped, stumbled back, and then lunged. Teeth sank into the cop's leg. "Get it off!" David shouted. "Libby! Stop!" But Libby was protecting her person. She knew danger when she felt it. The cop pulled his weapon. David froze. "No! Don't!" A gunshot split the air. And then silence. David dropped to his knees. "Libby! Libby!" There was no answer. Only the heavy silence after the gunshot. His heart pounded so loud he could barely hear. He reached out blindly, his hands trembling, searching for her. And then he felt fur. Warm. Sticky. He felt her shallow breath against his palm. She was alive, but barely. His whole world cracked in that moment. His only family, the one soul that had never left him, was lying on cold concrete, wounded by a man who wore a badge. The crowd gathers. Someone gasped. Another person shouted. "He shot a guide dog." Phones came out. Cameras pointed. The cop, suddenly aware that this wasn't going to disappear, started to stammer. It attacked me. I feared for my life." David's voice was low, raw, shaking with rage. "You kicked her. You provoked her. She was doing her job, protecting me." The crowd was growing. A woman knelt beside him. "I called an ambulance. An animal rescue. Help's coming." David held Libby's head in his lap, whispering, "Stay with me, baby girl, please, stay with me." The department tries to cover it up. At the hospital, they took Libby into surgery. David sat alone in a cold waiting room, fists clenched so tight his nails cut into his palms. He could hear the whispers around him. "Cop shot a guide dog? He's done. They'll sweep it under the rug, they always do. But not this time. Because the video was already viral. Millions of people had seen it by morning. And they were furious. The interrogation. Detectives came. Not to arrest David, but to question the officer. David sat calmly when they asked for his statement. He insulted me. He kicked my dog. He pulled the trigger. The evidence was clear. The department tried to stall, but the public pressure was too big. Protests formed outside the precinct. Hashtags flooded every platform. Hashtag justice for Libby. Hashtag not all heroes wear badges, some shoot dogs. Hours felt like days. David sat in that cold hospital waiting room, hands shaking, heart heavy. The surgeon finally walked out, footsteps soft but certain. Mr. Miller? David's breath caught in his throat. She's alive. Tears he didn't even know he'd been holding back finally fell. She's a fighter, the surgeon added. She's going to make it. David buried his face in his hands, overcome with relief. He hadn't lost her. Not today. Not ever. The world takes notice. The next morning, David woke to the sound of his phone buzzing. He couldn't see the screen, but he could hear the flood of notifications. Texts. Voicemails. Reporters. News stations. People offering help, money, support. The video had gone everywhere. Talk shows. National headlines. Even celebrities tweeting. A blind black veteran, assaulted and humiliated by a racist cop. His guide dog shot for protecting him. We will not stay silent. Hashtag justice for David. Hashtag Libby the hero. The public was demanding action. And for once, they were listening. The arrest. Within 48 hours, Officer Thomas Briggs was fired. But that wasn't enough. Under pressure from the mayor's office, the DA filed charges. Assault. Animal cruelty. Hate crimes enhancement. The same man who thought his badge gave him power was now facing up to 15 years behind bars. David didn't have to lift a finger. The world had lifted it for him. Libby comes home. 2 weeks later, Libby came home. Her steps were slower. Her side still sore. But when David opened the door, she nudged his hand with her nose, tail wagging softly. He knelt down, tears streaming down his face. You stayed with me, girl. You stayed. She licked his face like nothing had changed. Because to her, nothing had. She was still his protector. His eyes. His heart. The moment of triumph. Months later, David stood in court, Libby by his side in her vest. Officer Briggs sat in the defendant's chair, head bowed. The judge spoke. This court finds the defendant guilty on all counts. Briggs was led away in cuffs. And the courtroom erupted in applause. Reporters crowded around. But David just knelt down and whispered to Libby. We did it. She wagged her tail. Epilogue. Libby lived many more happy years by David's side. They became a symbol, not just of loyalty, but of resilience, justice, and hope. And every time someone asked David how he kept going, he'd smile, pat Libby's head, and say, because she never left me. And I'll never leave her.